So let's take a look at using the export skeleton builder here in RHiggit. The first thing to take note of is that you will want to use it whilst setting up your character. You could theoretically use it after you've finished a character and bolt it on as an extra, but that will limit your options somewhat. Now it doesn't matter whether you're in edit mode like this, you can add the export skeleton at either point, but ideally you do want to be using it whilst you're in the process of initially setting up your character. So, when we punch it, we will get our little options panel pop up, which allows you to configure the style of skeleton and the bone number that you want. Different numbers of spine bones, finger bones, the number of bones per finger, roll bones or spacers or eyes, and so on. The default options that are entered when you first launch it are intended to give you a nice medium weight skeleton that's going to be pretty good for most game engines, but which still delivers a setup for getting pretty good deforms. So when we hit OK, our skeleton will be built for us, and everything is hooked up and ready to go. We're in edit mode here, so of course we can start repositioning and posing our setup as we would normally in RHiggit, and the whole export skeleton works alongside that. So just like we've been used to in RHiggit, you can switch in and out of edit mode and rig mode and test things out, and the export skeleton is all integrated there for you. One of the first things you'll probably want to do is to of course select your character, switch to bones mode and open up properties, and change the use bones from object from the regular RHiggit deform rig. Just scroll all the way to the bottom and you'll find the export skeleton null there, and select that. Your character deforms are now being driven by the export skeleton, so when you go into rig mode, it is now the export skeleton bones that are driving your character, and there you have that. Now, maybe you will or won't want to keep the pre-existing RHiggit deform rig. In all honesty, I would suppose that you're going to want to use one deform rig or the other. I certainly wouldn't recommend keeping both in your character. A, you can't use them both at the same time, and B, having them both is only going to slow down your rig performance. You can therefore, if you've decided to go for the export rig, grab the regular deform rig main null and just clear it, get rid of the whole thing, and so that deform rig just goes away. And you can still go switching in and out of edit mode and rig mode, setting up your character now with the export skeleton rig as its deform rig. If, as you're playing around with it, you decide that you'd like a slightly different bone configuration perhaps, that's not a problem, because at any point you can select the export skeleton, get rid of that, and then just rebuild the thing with different options, and it all continues to work exactly as it should. Notice of course that if you do clear the export rig and add a new one, your character will have lost its reference to that null, so you'll need to go back into bones and properties and set it back to the export skeleton again. Now of course, since this skeleton is meant to be used for exporting, you will normally want to use a different weights pattern. By default, when the rig is built, when the export skeleton is built, the bones will be set to use the default RHiggit weight set, assuming of course that they exist within the model. This doesn't necessarily denote the fact that that's how they're meant to be. If you're exporting to a game engine, then you do need to weight in a virtually one weight per bone fashion. So you can think of these default weights that come on your bones as something of a placeholder setting. Obviously, the exact layout of the final weights that you use has to be up to you. But of course, for changing them, it's pretty simple. You just select your bone, bring up its properties, and you give it whichever weight map you're wanting it to use. And we'll look at some specifics of that kind of weighting in another video for those who aren't so used to it. Otherwise, the only other thing I want to show you is that with the different rigs, for instance the advanced deform structure rig, and of course the quadruped rigs, you will get different options appear on your panel to allow you to build export skeleton structures that match the features available in these templates. In the case of the advanced deform rig, you get this option other spacers, which are these little spacer bones at the elbow, wrist, knee and ankle there. And so that of course, as you can see, lets you build skeletons with lots of bones for absolute control over all the little deforms and shaping, as seen in the Hulk in the promo video. Something else to draw your attention to, the kind of little changes that you can make yourself. For instance here, let's take the fingers. Bones per digit goes from 1 to 4. Obviously, the default is 3, so you get a 3 bone finger. When we enter 4, what we get is the metacarpal joint added as well. Of course, what if you were saying, well, I want the metacarpal, but then I only want 2 bones in the main finger? There's no option in this panel that allows you to do that, and to add all of these possible different options would have created a very long and laborious panel. The simple way that you can deal with such things as that is just to come in and find those extra bones at the end that you aren't wanting, and you can just clear them yourself. That won't cause any problems or breakages or anything else. So similarly, if you wanted one finger to have 3 bones and maybe the other fingers just have 2 bones to be simpler, then you could do that as well, just by manually removing bones from the end that you don't want. Again, the same goes for things like the hold bones and the muscles. Maybe say, well, yes, I want these underarm hold bones, but I really don't want these hip ones. You could just clear them. Maybe you think, yes, I want these pec muscles, but I don't want these rear side lat muscles. You could just clear them. Usually, to be safe, that's best done after you've finished your setup. Whilst doing your setup, just set them to no weight map, 0 strength, so as they're ignored. But otherwise, they can be cleared perfectly safe without breaking things or giving you other kinds of issues. The last little checkbox that I want to draw your attention to is this one here, record pivots. When checked, this will record pivot rotations for all of the bones. Now, when working in Lightwave, that's a handy thing to have, and it can prevent certain errors in some extreme poses. The way that the skeleton lays itself out has been thought through to the extent that you should, for the vast majority of characters, the vast majority of the time, and the vast majority of poses, be able to work in Lightwave without recorded pivot bones. And if you're going to a game engine using something like the Ogre exporter, that's important, because if you record pivots, the Ogre exporter will not properly translate that out to the game engine. If you're using something like Unity, where you would use Lightwave's FBX export to take your animated boned mesh into Unity, then Lightwave's FBX exporter will remove pivot rotation if it has been recorded for items. So if your final export method is going to be FBX, you might want to use record pivots. But do be careful, and I do recommend some experimentation, because occasionally Lightwave's method of removing pivot recording at the FBX export stage can go a little bit wrong. You might wind up with a single bone somewhere pointing off in a funny direction. This is a setting that's worth doing a bit of testing with, just to be sure that you're getting exactly the right outcomes when going from Lightwave to your other app or your games engine. And that basically is that. That's how the export skeleton builder works, how you can use it, and how to get the kind of setups that you're after for your character.